Strike Fighter is amongst the most versatile of modern combat aircraft. Part fighter, part bomber, these aircraft excel in both offensive and defensive air combat. This video ordnance program looks at recent developments in the world's strike fighters.
And these airplanes have supposed dual capability. That is, they're supposed to be able to fire either against aircraft or against ground targets. And that's not easy because the radar for ground targets would normally be quite different than an air-to-air radar. But what they did was much more impressive than that. They're on this run. They jump suddenly by 2 MiGs. They break off from the bombing attack. They switch to air-to-air format. They shoot down the 2 MiGs, then they resume the bombing. Now, in the past, typically, if you were a fighter bomber and you were jumped, you dropped your bombs and then fought. They didn't even have to drop their bombs. They kept the bombs on board, shot down the MiGs with missiles, and then resumed. That's quite a remarkable capability. That's something you would never have seen before. And I wouldn't attribute it just to the airplane, I'd attribute it to the computer system that goes with the airplane. A lot of what you saw in that war that was so impressive had to do with radical improvements in computer capability.
The configuration a very different type of aircraft from the other, tailored to very specific attack missions. The Harrier vertical takeoff jet is a nearly unique variety of strike fighter. The only other comparable jump jet is the Soviet Navy's Yak-38 Forger. The Harrier was developed in Britain to fulfill a very special requirement. In modern air wars, air bases are a prime target. If the runways can be put out of action, the high-performance jet fighters will be unable to take off and land. The Harrier avoids this problem with its vertical takeoff and landing features. It can take off like a conventional jet, and its Rolls-Royce engine is specially configured so that the exhaust can be vented downwards, enabling the Harrier to take off and land vertically. The Harrier can operate from small clearings near the battle area, regardless of the conditions of local runways. The Falklands War in 1982 demonstrated the versatility of the Harrier.
Going back to the Falklands, without the Harrier there would have been no air power for the British Navy and for the British Air Force. So we use that also in the central region and in other places. We can operate away from airfields, away from long strips, either in the woods, on ships, on strips, on bit of tarmac roads near villages. You can use it anywhere.
The complexity of the engine arrangement on the Harrier means that the pilot has a larger array of controls in the cockpit than in more conventional fighter aircraft.
It is an extra lever next to the throttle lever, which normally for forward flight, the nozzles are pointing aft, and when you want to slow down into the hover, you bring that lever back and the nozzles go down to the vertical, or to slow down even quicker forward of the vertical. And then as you slow down and the wing loses lift, then you have to replace that with engine power, so you bring up the engine to high power settings to compensate for that loss of lift. So in effect, when you're in the hover, you're sitting on a column of air from the engine.
In spite of the added complexity presented by the engine, the Harrier is popular with its flight crews due to its handling qualities.
I think it's a tremendous aircraft to fly because it's so unique. It's got the helicopter type qualities and the normal conventional aircraft qualities. You know, for instance, when you're flying around at 420 knots, 480 knots at low level, half an hour later you're hovering above a metal pad, and that is tremendous feeling, superb. And that, I think, is a big benefit from the pilot's point of view of the Harrier, really.
The primary mission of the RAF's Harrier GR5s is the ground attack mission. But the Falklands fighting made it clear that the Harrier can perform in the fighter role as well.
You find that we do a lot more air combat than even the air defence guys. They do radar combat, and we do a lot of aircraft-to-aircraft fighting. So a lot of our training is pure air combat. I'd imagine 40% of it. So whenever the weather is not good, or we've done a tremendous amount of low level, we go up and we do combat, and we do that as normal. And we're one of the very few ground attack aircraft that do it, simply because of the flexibility of the Harrier, as you say.
The United States Marine Corps has been a particularly enthusiastic supporter of the jump jet concept. The Marines currently fly the AV-8B Harrier, a second generation of the aircraft developed in cooperation between British Aerospace and McDonnell Douglas. The Marine pilots are as enthusiastic about its performance as their British counterparts.
Being a Harrier pilot is kind of special because I think we're the best pilots. We're the best stick and rudder men, I think, in military aviation, because it's the best of both worlds. I mean, you hover like a helicopter and you fly straight and level like a regular aircraft. So I enjoy the VSTOL part of the Harrier aviation community.
VSTOL, what is that?
Vertical short takeoff and landing.
The Harrier itself, what kind of aircraft is it to handle and fly?
Oh, it's like a little sports car. Handles very well. It's not supersonic like some of the other high-speed fighter aircraft, but it maneuvers very well, and it's very versatile as far as what you can do with the aircraft and basically where you can operate the aircraft from. And we only need a 2,000-foot aluminum strip to take off. And of course, you can land in the spot the size of a tennis court. So the fun thing about Harrier aviation is where you operate the aircraft from. And of course, it's state-of-the-art, so it's got a lot of nice weapon systems in it that make it easy on you.
The Marines' interest in the Harrier can be traced to their special role in America's armed forces. The Marines have traditionally been employed as an expeditionary force, able to carry out combat assignments thousands of miles from major bases. The Harrier fits into the Marine operations, since it can operate from small carriers, called amphibious assault ships in the U.S. Navy. And once the Marines have secured a beachhead, the Harriers provide close air support from the beachhead area itself. During the Gulf War in 1991, Harrier units were the primary source of close air support for Marine ground units. The Harriers were based at forward positions not far from the Kuwait border. During the opening phases of Desert Storm, the Harriers flew strike missions well into Kuwait, attacking storage facilities, artillery positions, and other types of targets. Although the Harrier is usually viewed as a close air support aircraft for direct support of Marine ground units, it proved capable of carrying out the deep attack missions as well. This was in large part due to important improvements incorporated in the newer AV-8B Harrier II. The current version of the Harrier has nearly twice the range of the earlier Harrier I. Once the ground war began, the Harrier switched missions and began providing close air support for Marine ground forces during the liberation of Kuwait. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, better known to its pilots as the Warthog, is one of the oddest-looking strike aircraft in the world. Projecting from its blunt nose is a 30mm cannon, specially designed to destroy armored vehicles. This weapon, the GAU-8 Gatling gun, fires 15-ounce depleted uranium projectiles at a rate of 70 per second. The A-10 was designed specifically to hunt and attack tanks. Fast strike fighters have a nearly impossible time dealing with tanks. Moving at hundreds of miles an hour, fast jets have a hard time finding relatively small targets such as tanks. And tanks are so heavily armored that they require a direct hit to destroy. The A-10, although large, is graceful and maneuverable at low altitudes in a manner not found in fast jets.
In my view, it's not a pretty airplane, as you can see, but the GAU-8 30mm gun, it's probably probably the best gun built that we could. That's what the airplane is built on. It was built around the gun to start with. It's highly protective. We have titanium around the cockpit to protect the pilot. It has dual control surfaces, everything back up. We had one land with no hydraulics, pretty well shot up, which I think they're going to show you. It can take a lot of damage, and it can still come back and maybe fight another day, or at least get the asset of the pilot back to the friendly side, which is real good.
It really isn't very pretty, is it?
No, sir. It doesn't fly real fast, but it's fun. It's a different type of mission than maybe the air-to-air guys have, and it's a different mindset and different way of thinking when you fly the airplane.
The A-10's unique design came about in part as a result of the Vietnam War. During Vietnam, many expensive fighter bombers were shot down by small arms fire. The A-10 was designed to survive in the close attack environment against machine gun fire. The two large engines are separated from one another so that if one is knocked out by a missile or by gunfire, the other is likely to survive. The A-10 can continue flying on only one engine. The flight controls are redundant so that if one control is knocked out, another can usually take its place. And the pilot sits in an armored bathtub, protecting him from most ground fire. This became very clear in the Gulf War in 1991. This A-10 was hit on its right wing, yet it was able to make it back to its base in Saudi Arabia, even with one of its hydraulic lines blown away.
The A-10 was built to take a beating and keep on going, and this incident here was just to prove it, just to prove its worth. It could have gone with worse, it could have been a lot worse, and it could have made it, but it was built for durability, and it's withstood some of the roughest hits around.